Okay, Wayne, thanks for having us here. There's actually a few people here since I was doing another presentation on information security, so I'll try to not be your lunch since you need to be at lunch very shortly. So today, the topic that obviously I wanted to present is about a little bit quick update on the Middle East cyber wars. I think this is the third edition or maybe fourth edition of this topic. So we will try to go through it in the most effective and fastest way possible. The next screen you see is just a disclaimer saying that this is nothing to do with an organization I happen to do some business with. So I have to write something like that. So please ignore that part, and we're not promoting any items here. And obviously we'll not be discussing. So the most important part is the next few screens. So you should be able to see now 216. Do you see that screen? Okay, perfect. So this year actually started in a very interesting way because, as you can see, the Middle East cyber war was actually kind of getting kick-started as well. So denial or distributed denial of service was launched against the BBC from the Middle East. As a result, some of their servers and their website were not available for a period of time. So it's just to highlight that even organizations that are in the West are basically being easily and quite greatly affected by the ongoing disputes in the Middle East as well. Now, there's a specific website that maybe some of the other presenters may be referring to, since they tend to collect a lot of statistics about the types of attacks, the source of the attacks, and the qualification of these attacks. But if you look at the statistics over the last 2 years, there's obviously continues to be a little bit of change over 2014 versus 2015. And you see, obviously, cyber warfare is slowly playing an important role as the attacks basically move forward. So I think you'll realize that this is quite important. I'll try to highlight it in a few of the upcoming screens as well. I guess the key players in this new war, obviously, we have the United States being a key ally of some of the key countries in the region. So they have to actually pay attention to, obviously, some of the key players. And one of the key players today in the region is somebody known as ISIS or Daesh. So after somehow ignoring ISIS for a long period of time, although they may have been doing something on the ground, they're certainly not doing anything electronically. The Pentagon actually officially launched some press conference in which they said, oh, we're actually going to go after Daesh after some time. And there was a lot of cheer in the process. One interesting aspect is that initially the Pentagon may have a lot of resources behind them, but you quickly realize that maybe they were not the best qualified people to actually launch this initial set of attacks for the simple reason they may not have as much knowledge as other people in the region have, or maybe a more distributed organization like Anonymous. So something like Anonymous was able to actually inflict some initial damage on ISIS by launching very simple attacks. They went and defaced some of the key pages of ISIS and they replaced them with the famous pill that people know about, the famous blue pill. So in which they actually advertised instead of recruiting for people that actually were, promoting this. Now, interesting, at the same time as Pentagon was announcing this wash against Daesh and cyber war, there's obviously a press release that got announced, but you quickly realized that it was actually the Pentagon in the United States that actually suffered one of the first humiliating attacks.
Hackers claiming to represent Islamic State have hijacked some social media accounts used by the American military. Our correspondent Gianni is in Washington. She's got the latest details for us. Gianni, what do we know about these hackers and how much damage has this attack done?
Well, Andrew, just as President Obama was wrapping up his speech on cybersecurity and consumer data protection, the official Twitter account of U.S. Central Command started spilling out propaganda from the Islamic State terrorist group. And on YouTube, pro-Islamic State videos were being posted on CENTCOM's official channel. Some internal military documents also appeared on the CENTCOM Twitter feed. It's not clear whether there is any serious security threat. The White House says they're looking into the hack, but the timing was quite embarrassing. President Obama spoke about protecting internet users and their data. And in the meantime, a US government agency was unable to protect its own Twitter account. One can argue, of course, that it's just a Twitter account and a YouTube channel and not a large data breach, and that it was more of a PR attack by ISIS rather than a technical one. But again, the timing. And speaking of timing, US lawmakers are considering tougher cybersecurity laws. Last week, citing the Sony Pictures cyber attack, one congressman, Democrat, revived a controversial cybersecurity bill that would allow US technology companies and businesses to share private user data with the government, previously known as the CISPA. The new bill aims to, quote, help businesses proactively prevent attacks by creating a...
Artis Gan live from Washington there, thank you.
So you can see that the US trying to be first hands up, but sometimes how you appear on the media is as important. Obviously, all the key countries in the region, including United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Qatar, have been obviously leading the protection against this critical infrastructure. All of these four countries have actually created critical infrastructure protection, and as a result of that, they started the process of initiating defense mechanisms against that critical infrastructure as well. As you saw in the press in the last few days, there's been a new cyber war as a result of the Turkish and the Armenian conflict. So although this conflict was creating real casualties on the front, the same casualties are actually being spilled over on the electronic front as well. I think one of the important aspects that is worthwhile highlighting is in this year, there's been quite a large number of data leaks as a result. And there's some examples of these data leaks. One of them is obviously affecting Turkey, where about 50% of the national ID information of the entire population of the country got leaked online. So you can quickly imagine the kind of impacts to such a country, which is one of the key allies in the area, and the kind of attacks that will be launched as a result of this leak online. If you're looking about leaks, I think the Middle East is also being affected by the famous Panama Papers leaks. If you compare this obviously to the Snow leak a few years ago, where 1.7 gigabytes of information got leaked online, the Panama Papers leaked 2.6 terabytes of data, including vital information that leads to some of the key leaders in the area. Now, some leaders in Europe already had to somehow resign their posts, so we'll see what will be the results of the impact of those leaks. Now, if we look at this in terms of percentage of population and percentage of revenue, you quickly see a lot of countries in the area like Emirates, UAE, and others are basically being affected quite substantially by the size of those leaks. So as a result, it will be worthwhile watching what is the impact of that over the next few months. Many of us actually remember a lot about Stuxnet. Obviously, the Stuxnet got launched against Iran. It was a program that lasted something 5 to 7 years. It actually took 3 to 4 years before it was actually discovered. But there was a much more dangerous plan that was designed as a backup plan against that if Stuxnet would not have worked, called Nitro Zeus. Although Nitro Zeus was in itself never launched, it just highlights the kind of problems that are a result of these attacks. Being Stuxnet, we realized that this specific attack got decompiled, and so now the cyber weapon is actually being used as a boomerang, and where this kind of attack is now being launched against other countries and other organizations by using some of the components of this original attack. Now, we may sometimes think of Middle East organizations as not being very sophisticated, but they're sophisticated enough to actually launch app on the Google Store and actually get this Apple approved and use this for basically launch their propaganda. It took actually some time before Google was able to locate and actually remove this app from the Apple Store. This is not the only software that is being generated in the Middle East. If you've seen some of my earlier presentations, you realize that previous Taliban groups had created their own encryption algorithms and their own toolkit to actually exchange the encrypted communications for their activities. Now, we obviously, when we talk about cyber war, and specifically about Middle East cyber war, it's not a war of equals. So organizations and countries like Iran which are probably rated today 4th or 5th in the world in terms of size and capacity of their cyber army, are able to actually launch sophisticated attacks against countries that are much more powerful and have much greater degree of resources. And some of these examples obviously involve, and I think if you remember over the last 1 year, 2 years, the casinos got hacked, and obviously casinos being an important source of funds, as a result, they got major disruption. Now, not only the casinos got hacked, there was a major dam that at the time was being partially repaired, so that no catastrophe actually resulted, but the hackers were able to get control of the cyber elements that controlled the dam. If they were simply not connected to the actually lifting gates that would have resulted potentially in even leading to human loss of life, given that you could have flooded a region associated with that particular dam area. One of my first works in this area was a long time ago when I used to work in Environment Canada, where we used to predict the lake levels and how to schedule the opening and closing of these dams to actually cause the least amount of damage by the floods. As you know, during the various times of the year, there's a lot of rain, and as a result, the controlling of these dams is extremely important. As a result of this new type of attacks, what is considered before simply a distributed denial of service can today actually be considered active cyber war. So the US government, as a result of this, has initiated the prosecution of some key elements. Obviously, there was a denial of service attacks that were launched against banking industry or critical banking industry in the United States. And as a result of that, some organizations and some individuals actually got highlighted as being key players. And as a result, some countries like Iran got identified as being the primary initiators of this conflict. But sometimes even smaller countries, like for example, Palestine, which today is under partial occupation, depending on how you perspective, you quickly realize that they are able to actually hack into Israeli drones. And as a result, in the past, they've been able to actually identify attacks against themselves by the Israeli army before they actually take place. Now, they are not the only ones that have previously attacked drones. Last year, there was a presentation in one of the drones of the United States actually got captured. And as a result, obviously, material from this drone got decompiled. And as a result, more sophisticated attacks can be launched against these devices in the future. As you know, drones today play a key part in the real war that is actually taking place in the air. Obviously, other major conflicts occur between Pakistan and India. Again, another Apple got removed from the Google store called Smesh. This particular Apple used in social networks or was being used by the Pakistani ISI group to spy on the Indian military. The same group that sometimes helps with the Palestinians, as a result, also leaked online information about FBI and Department of Homeland Security details. The details of almost 30,000 agents got leaked online. As you know, today, the security of those individuals is extremely critical. So as a result, it is important to actually preserve as much of this information as confidential as possible. In many cases, this information is simply available by Googling it online, or at least being able to Google it the correct way. There's very advanced courses that actually teach you how to do this in a very effective way. So the same tools that are used today for our research can also be used by our adversaries as well in a very effective way. Not every country necessarily uses effective mechanisms to defend themselves. So sometimes they resort to very basic methods. And one example is Egypt. Egypt may not have the resources to actually launch very sophisticated monitoring against their users in the country. So they simply decide to block the service. And obviously, this method has been used in other countries quite effectively as well. Last year, we talked about distributed denial of service attack that was launched against critical infrastructure. More specifically, this was the telecommunication industry in the Middle East, we're talking about attacks that are 300 gigabits per second, so quite important in terms of size. I think this year we're seeing attacks that are neighboring about 600 gigabytes per second. So the kind of infrastructure that is required to protect yourself against these attacks needs to be much more sophisticated and having the bandwidth capacity to defend yourself quite effectively. Organizations in countries that are actually the leading ones in defending themselves or are actually the providers of the best tools in cybersecurity today, they sometimes are themselves the nature of the impact of cyber attacks. And one example was the Israel Electric Authority got basically some downtime in their grid as a result of a severe cyber attack against their electrical infrastructure. As you know, North America suffered a similar disruption quite a few years ago, and this may be pretests of future more sophisticated attacks. Other areas that have been impacted by attacks is maritime. So some websites have been, maritime industry have been attacked by ISIS. As you know, today, 95% of all trade and goods get shipped by maritime industry. So if one is able to disrupt maritime industry shipping of goods, the impacts to the supply chain that can be launched can quickly rival attacks against things like banking or telecom infrastructure. They're not the only ones that have used sophisticated attacks. The Somali Pirates quite effectively launch attacks in which they monitor the telecommunications of boats. They're able to identify GPS coordinates. In many cases, a lot of the boats, when they're navigating through these areas, they actually simply shut down their systems to avoid any kind of detection. If you're interested, I'll be able to share a full presentation on this topic in the future as well. Now, what gets launched against the United States also gets launched against ISIS. So you can say sometimes you launch a boomerang, but that boomerang comes back to hit you as well. So ISIS also suffered their own severe data breach in which the information about 22,000 of their members got leaked online. Actually, much more important than just information about these members was information about the kind of techniques they use for recruiting, including interviews, selection criteria, and other methods also got completely revealed online as well. One area that obviously we have neglected in terms of protecting ourselves is the usage of social media. And all of a sudden, in the middle of last year, organizations like Twitter kind of waked up and say, oh, they are using social media against us. Let's kind of start taking it proactively. So they ended up shutting down about 125,000 Twitter accounts. But even this is only a small dent of the kind of Twitter accounts that actually get created very fast, including the automatic followers. As you can see, this kind of suspensions obviously have taken a toll, but you quickly realize that as quickly as these accounts actually get shut down, a new bunch of them get created, and ensuite the followers actually take place. Now, to summarize and actually finish my presentation today, I would like to highlight a few key points. One is that organizations like GCHQ, which is from the UK, are spending substantial amount of dollars or pounds in this case about protecting their critical infrastructure. They realize that this investment has not allowed them to defend themselves as effectively as they wished. So really, are we spending the money correctly to defend ourselves against what we call asymmetrical attacks? Let me take this problem one level further. The kind of communication systems that the US today uses on the field is rigged with vulnerabilities. So that means the same way today Palestine and others can spy on the drones launched by Israel, attackers can spy on the telecommunication systems by using US and its allies on the field. So that really means that even the basic level of protection have not actually taken place. Obviously, in this area, it is important to understand and classify all the elements of critical infrastructure. I named a few, but things like transportation, banking, telecom, water, desalination. For example, if you take a city like Riyadh today, which is about something like 6 to 7 million inhabitants, all the water comes from eastern province, from Dammam, and it's desalinated water. So if somebody was to attack the desalination plant electronically and shut down wanted to react, within 3 to 4 days, basically that city will become an uninhabitable city. Yes. Well, Saudi has created a new department headed by the Ministry of Interior. They actually moved one of the doctors. I can send you the details of this doctor to actually protect critical infrastructure. So, and they have initiated some programs to basically monitor the attacks. They've created a national encryption algorithm and others. So they are well underway, but you can say these are the first steps. Okay, we can. We continue or we pause? Okay, perfect. So there's 3 more slides and we'll wrap it up. So obviously, organizations or countries that today, for example, do not necessarily have the same advanced capabilities, they have the capacity to very quickly launch sophisticated attacks because they can hire the mercenaries to actually launch the cyber attacks. As you know, today you can easily buy exploits online anywhere from $10,000, $20,000 to $500,000 or more. I think what is important is to realize the pecking order in the area. Obviously, US and its allies, as well as Israel, are on the top of the scale in terms of spending and capabilities in cyber war. Turkey is not much far behind, but Iran is playing a very big role. So then behind that, we have Saudi Arabia, UAE, Pakistan, and India, not necessarily in that order. As you can see, Saudi Arabia today is spending a very big deal of their national budget on security, and what they're spending on the normal war on the ground, they're obviously spending the equivalent almost online as well. Now, the important aspect that I wanted to highlight about the asymmetry of the attacks is that today, depending on how you see the hacker, you see it as somebody that either defends you or I can actually create it as an asset to launch an attack against you in the future. I still think most organizations, especially in the Middle East, have a lot of work to do in the area of testing their agility against cyber attacks. And the best example was obviously the Shamu attack that happened several years ago. And by the way, the impacts of Shamu on Saudi Aramco and Rasgas exist to this day. To give you an idea, some systems in Saudi Aramco continue to be disconnected from others. And for example, a system in engineering and XPEC and OSPAS are not talking to each other because of fears of future attacks as well. A few quick lessons learned to wrap up my presentation. Everybody is working on building up capacity, especially the clients and the organizations in the area that have the capability to do so. This obviously involve organizations like Saudi Arabia, our country, UAE, Qatar, Oman. Asymmetry plays obviously a very important role in the area. Social networks, although we have neglected, they matter because they actually control human perception of what is going on the ground. Agility and attribution need to be addressed in more detail. And I think more focus needs to be put on critical infrastructure. And this involves the 10 or 12 elements of critical infrastructure that need to be addressed. I told you 25 minutes, I'm on 24:99. So any more questions? So, and the other ones we can take offline. I'll be happy to take them from you. Yes. Yes, I mean, in this context, what they've identified is, for example, traditional comm systems like RF and others that are used on the battlefield themselves have vulnerabilities. I can send you a couple of papers on that. And because they have vulnerabilities, people are actually able to listen on those comm systems. And by the way, the same thing is happening about drones and others. So that means they are not being properly tested and they're not being properly rolled out into the field. So if they have very basic vulnerabilities, today the adversaries are smart guys and they can quickly take advantage of these vulnerabilities to their advantage very effectively. By the way, the same thing is happening on drones, where today, for example, there's different variation of drones are being sold with different capabilities to different governments. So for example, for the military, high-grade encryption, but for the cities or others, the same drones are being released with zero encryption or very minimal encryption. So that means depending on who's paying the same amount for the same product, they're not actually getting the same product. And so the vulnerabilities that come with that can be, or the impact can be quite substantial. Next question.